Okay, so fellow Agilists, welcome to Season 2 and the latest installment of the Virtually Agile videocast. This series shares conversations with Agile thought leaders as well as amplifying newer voices, and today's guest is one of those newer voices. I was first introduced to Jess after I'd shared a bit of content on Reddit, I believe. Not my usual format for sharing things, but I was experimenting, and I think I chucked out one of my Agile games. It was a spooky Halloween scene, a game about outcomes versus outputs, and Jess then reached out as a consequence, and we've been liaising back and forth a little bit ever since. So I'm delighted to welcome Jess Brock to the show. Jess is a fellow Agile coach, a curator of Agile Curated, and I believe recently Vice President of Consulting at Agility in Mind. Welcome to the show, Jess.
Thank you. Yeah, guilty on all charges there. And I am chuckling because I forgot that we met on Reddit, which I think is so beautiful and random. I love that so much. Thanks for having me today.
Not a problem. So first and foremost, how are you today? How are things in Jess's world?
Good. It's a little busy, but I like it busy. It's busy and productive. So definitely excited for that. A lot of things happening. You mentioned Agility in Mind. That's a new role for me. I've only been involved with that, with the consultancy for a couple months now. So still, things are evolving and growing there. We're opening up we opened a U.S. subsidiary. So a lot of the excitement that comes with a new segment of business is happening right now. So all good stuff.
Exciting times. If I do recall, I did see kind of a virtual Agility in Mind opening event where you were like cutting a bit of a ribbon style grand opening thing. Liked it.
Yeah. We pitched that idea kind of out of jest, and we're like, wait a minute, why not? Let's do it. And I'm fortunate to be able to work with folks who let me have a little fun, and I think it turned out okay. It's definitely delivered the message, which that was the intent.
Wonderful. So I would like to start just by asking you and learning a little bit more about yourself, about you, about your journey with agility. I understand from our previous liaisons, our previous conversations, that you weren't always quite sold on Agile. So tell me all about that.
Oh my gosh. It's something that I don't really mention often. Maybe I should mention it more just to kind of give some context and share my journey and maybe make agility more approachable to others who are kind of skeptical. But so I was a people manager of an app dev team, a little over 10 years ago. And that's when agility, the
interesting journey, and probably one that I would say many similar people in the industry have experienced also, being initially reluctant, resistant, maybe not knowing any otherwise, and therefore not understanding what the art of the possible was, trying that first experiment, seeing the benefits on morale, on stakeholder engagement, the results being delivered, and then, wow, I don't feel like I can go back anymore.
Yeah, and I think even to this day, I'm a very less talk, more action type of person. That's just who I am as an individual, I think. It's just, so when we were talking in theory about agility and visualizing work and boards, I'm like, just make a stop, let's just work. Let's just produce, get results. I wasn't seeing the results, and I think that's what drove my skepticism. But when we had that moment with that stakeholder on the first shot, was in love with the MVP, and we continued to build out that with those results, that was the proof I needed personally to say, now I get it.
To that exact same sentiment, I am quoting Elvis all the time, and I say a little less conversation, a little more action. You know? To quote one of his famous songs, always saying that. And to me, it's that bias towards action. Try something. It doesn't have to be perfect. Try it, see what happens, learn accordingly, pivot towards something else. Just try, experiment. That's what I love about agility, and particularly how it's moving in 2021, and there's a huge focus towards it being this experimentative approach. It doesn't have to be a gold-plated solution. It doesn't have to be some ideal, perfect framework. Try and experiment, learn accordingly, see how it goes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you don't, you see what, I think it was, Simon Sinek, a couple of weeks ago, I watched one of his clips again. He was talking about how, the taxi industry failed to do what you just said, try to innovate, grow, experiment. And they're like, nope, it's always worked this way, and we're going to continue to have our yellow cabs and go about our ways. It is what it is. And then, Uber, Lyft, all of them came, adopted technology, new ways of working, and you kind of, how the rest of that story goes.
Well, yeah, it's the same with lots of companies, right? I think Blockbuster dominated the 80s and 90s with their model for enabling people to access entertainment, and then Netflix came along, and Netflix were originally this subscription model where you paid a service. And I remember walking through town centres and random salespeople coming up to me and saying, hey, you want to get involved in Netflix? What you do is you sign up here and we'll send you DVDs through the post. And I was like, no, I'm not interested. No, why would I do that? But then they evolved into, obviously, streaming online, and then that's the de facto method. They got in there early, they got the infrastructure set up, and now they're the leader in that market.
Right, and they inspired so many other streaming services too. You think about Disney Plus, and I have a daughter who's 7, and I don't know where I would be without Disney Plus right now. Amazon Prime, and et cetera, et cetera. It's pretty extraordinary. And the funny thing is I think this is true. I might need to fact check, but I want to say Netflix reached out to Blockbuster early on and said, hey, this is a thing. Would you, you're established. Would you like to partner? And it was a big fat no.
Yeah.
And we see how that panned out. So
They do indeed.
I don't even know if there's a Blockbuster that exists anymore. I really need
I think there might be one. I do remember a few years ago seeing like an empty one in the UK, and it gave me nostalgic moments, but yeah.
Yeah. Every Friday night going to get a video and some popcorn.
The good old days of having to rewind videotapes afterwards. Anyway. So talk to me about Agile Curated. This is another endeavor of yours. What's Agile Curated? What's it all about?
Okay, so that would segue, I think, a little bit into agility in mind as well. I think a lot of it, actually.
All right.
It's a big reason why I'm even at agility in mind. So, Agile Curated, let me walk it back to even broader context. So, 2020, everyone is familiar with what went down in 2020. We were all locked down and socially distanced, yada, yada.
for those that aren't familiar with LACE, that's the Lean Agile Center of Excellence, right? For the non-safe speakers that are listening.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that. Thank you. Um, so, yeah, so I got that heartbreaking news just an hour before going live, and before we sort of said, okay, we're flipping over to the live audience, as it were, I had told the facilitators, it was Jess Edwards and Duncan Evans, I was like, just need just a second, I just found this out, it was bad news, let's carry on, I need this distraction, show must go on. And so ended up having the session, and it was lovely. It was phenomenal. I very much enjoyed it. I learned stuff on the spot. We had great dialogue, great collaboration. And then when Jess had went back to talk to Agility in Mind about how, just a quick debrief, hey, how'd that session go? How did Jess do and all this? She had, shared the news. She's like, it went well. However, Jess had some bad news. Well, one thing led to another, and they said, well, we kind of already vetted her to a certain extent. Let's have her in for some recruiting. Let's see if she's interested in joining the team. So one thing led to another, and now I'm leading the U.S. Agile coaching practice. So and that business expansion. So it was pretty extraordinary. I would have never thought in a million years I'd be where I was with. Really, if you think about it, it's just taking a risk, taking a chance with Agile Curated and saying, what the heck? And it's opened up, I think it's really connected you and I, it's connected you with other people in my network. This has been really extraordinary.
And I really like that. I think you described it in somewhere I read as serendipitous, and I've always loved that word, serendipity, those beautiful accidents. But probably less of an accident because you created that opportunity by putting yourself out there, taking that risk. And actually, I have found myself a similar sort of experience when I've put myself out there, when I've taken risks, when I've engaged people, attended and given a talk at a meetup. That's broadened my network so much, and it's enabled me to learn and grow myself even further as a coach and as a professional. And that was going to lead into my next question, which is all about continuous learning, improving yourself. So I'm wondering, is there any particular approach that you use for your continuous learning? Are you a book reader, a podcast listener? Do you absorb other resources? You mentioned earlier part of curated was you were doing lots of article reading. What's your go-to approach for learning?
Yeah, so I think like many people these days, I am really keen on bite-sized content, whether it be audio content or written content or even videos. So again, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I am an article reader, and I follow a lot of the industry MVPs like Cone, Hit Back, anything by Scale Agile. The ones you probably would expect. Nothing alarming there. I am very keen on a newsletter, a couple newsletters, and one is called Corporate Rebels, and they experiment with different ways of working. So that's a great group, and they have a monthly newsletter. And really not even the newsletter, they're really good about keeping up with email marketing. And the daily newsletter that I absolutely cannot live without is The Hustle. That is, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it is phenomenal when it comes to if you're into technology and new and emerging technology and trends. It's think startups and entrepreneurial type speak. It is just phenomenal, and the way they write is just so funny. It's so entertaining. So those are my everyday go-tos. I would say also I'm a big fan this year of Blinkist. I'm not sure if you've heard of that.
I've heard of Blinkist, yes.
In the spirit of bite size, it's basically audiobooks, but the footnotes of audiobooks.
So the cliff notes, the abridged version that's almost the curated version. So it's just the main salient points that you might want to learn without all of the blurb and backgrounds.
Absolutely, and I swear I love all these products. I'm not paid to endorse them. I just love them that much. So I'll get on my bike, whether it's Zwift indoor riding or outside, and listen to some blinks, as they call it. And really what I've come to find is just interacting with people and doing trainings and exercises
Interesting. I've always loved I think personally the bite-sized content is always an aspiration of mine when I'm producing blog posts or videos, with the exception of these recorded videocast series. I'm aiming for kind of a 5-minute maximum length for any sort of read or consumption on behalf of that person consuming it, because I want it to be short and sharp. I want it to maintain their attention, not be something they have to scroll through 70 minutes of video to find the main bit they're looking for. So I love that you have a similar ethos there, and the Agile Curated was born in a similar vein, and the fact that you consume content in that way seems to marry up with a lot of people I hear as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just there's just so much content these days. I mean, my brain I don't think can process anything more than bite size. So just roll with it.
Nice. So again, on the topic of learning, you're a big believer in virtual dojos, and I believe you're giving a number of talks on maximizing engagement as part of Learning Dojo. So I'd love to hear more about your virtual dojos and how you maximize engagement of those participating.
Yes. So dojos, it's a natural passion topic of mine for sure. So I'm talking in the lightning talk. So speaking of bite-sized content, at Agile XP next week, I think it's on Tuesday, so June 15th, and then I'm talking at Agile 2021. And shame on me, I forgot. I think the schedule's up, but I forgot the actual time slot. In any case, it's the same talk, just different lengths. So the more bite-sized one being next week. But yeah, I got hooked on dojos with my Centene engagement, and let's see, because I'm trying to think, 2 years almost now, and that equates to about 14 dojos.
Okay.
And so a lot of experience with a lot of diverse experience. And from a team perspective, I find dojos to be just insanely effective, from learning retention to morale building to, just kind of making them believe again that, hey, we can innovate, hey, we matter, hey, we're making an impact. And then learning never goes out of style. Yes, you're an awesome developer, and you have all of these credentials, and you've done great things, but there's always room to improve and refine, right?
And just for perhaps the listeners who've not come across the concept of a learning dojo before, how would you describe it? Obviously, you've mentioned it's a place for learning and development, but how would you describe it in a succinct term?
Yeah, simple terms. So it's, I would say, think a set amount of time, usually 6 weeks, where a coach or a pair of coaches come in and work very intensively with the team to develop good habits, break bad habits, develop their skills. And when we say skills,
Thank you for that articulated description of dojos there. And what resonated me in particular was the phrase you used was feeling the pain, getting people feeling the pain of how it's like to be on the ground with the teams. It's the reason exactly that when I use gamification techniques, I'm trying to simulate how it feels to be part of a team. So as an example, if I'm trying to teach the concept of technical debt, what it means, how it feels having technical debt, and I've created a game that involves people that aren't directly in the team, I want them to feel how frustrating it is when things slow you down, that's not in your control, right? Or is in your control, but you need the ability to be empowered to prioritize dealing with technical debt. When I'm playing a game that's about context switching, and you've got a team that's constantly being bothered with all these different priorities coming in at different angles and constant context switching, inability to focus, I want the most senior person in that room to be the person who feels that exactly how it feels when someone's bombarding with them all this information and the consequence of it. So I like that these learning dojos obviously have a focus in learning and development in an increment of time, but also in a way that enables you to feel how it feels, how to be there with the team, their experience. Wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love it. And it's been just, again, classroom trainings are phenomenal in terms of building foundation and unity across an organization. But man, it's just been remarkable, the experiences I have had and what I've observed in the dojo. It really reinvigorates teams. And I've come to find out it sort of transforms teams from the inside out, right? Because you're working with each individual and really catering to them as much as possible within those 6 weeks. Coaches become part of the team, and it's that intensive focus that I think is the biggest differentiator. So yeah, if I were to summarize, it's a time-boxed, usually 6 weeks intensive learning that is based directly from your backlog. So you get to learn and deliver at the same time. It's a beautiful thing.
Excellent. And just from your perspective, you mentioned these talks you're giving. Are there any particular top takeaways that you could distill down around virtual dojos that you would share with the listeners today?
Absolutely. So dojos are classically extremely co-located, and this is pairing stations and big monitors. And think of open space that is. If you think of an agile company, like a company that is very progressive, and they have board games and balls and every color dry erase marker you can think of, right? That's usually that's reminiscent of a dojo space. So
Similar thing with me, whenever I do a talk, I'm always trying to leave people with actionable takeaways, things they can immediately pick up and try or experiment with in the next working day. So thank you for a few tips there. And if anyone wants to learn more about virtual dojos, maximizing engagement, obviously Jess has got a couple of talks coming up. Are there any further resources you'd recommend people look into if they want to learn more about virtual dojos in the meantime?
Oh my gosh, I'm not quite sure about virtual dojos.
Or just dojos as a concept in general?
Yeah, Dion Stewart and, gosh, I'm losing my words here. I'm going to look it up right now. But, yes, so it's called Creating Your Dojo by Joel Tulsi and Dion Stewart. And I can give you that information if you want to add it to this video.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's a good, if you've never heard of a dojo before, you're very, very new to it, it's a good go-to startup book. If you go to, if you Google Target Dojo, the actual department store, they really are credited for pioneering the dojo concept in the app dev, business product space, right? So they have a wonderful website that gives you more insights on dojos and their particular journey and how they're evolving it. So yeah, I would definitely recommend those two resources.
Sounds good.
Off the top of my head. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that. Coming towards the end now, so a couple of final questions for you. We kind of hinted towards it a bit earlier when you mentioned, obviously, we know what happened last year, the pandemic hit. A lot of people had to pivot the way they worked into a virtual inclusive environment. So my question to you is, in that time frame, in this past year, you must have learned some great tips, some great things that you found useful in enabling virtual agile coaching or agility working in remote distributed environments. What would those top tips be?
We're working in a remote environment. I mean, some of the things I've already shared, I know I labeled them dojo, but you can use them for pretty much any context, any session, right? Another one I would say, and this is, a lot of people say this, but it's really true, and it really resonated with me and saved my sanity, to be honest, is get away from your computer, get away from that office, get outside, enjoy nature, go for a walk or just go in another room, do something, because I would sit in this office for an entire day. I would sit there and work and everything would feel fine. I wouldn't feel tired, and I'd look outside and there goes another day. And that's just, it really didn't serve my mental state very well. So just get up and move, and you can make that a unique team norm if you want to coach your teams and incorporate that as an idea to your team and say, hey, let's do a midday stretch as a team or a midday walk. You can carry your phone with you throughout your neighborhood, show off your neighborhood, walk your dog, or something to get you out of the office and moving, get that blood pumping, because we're just sitting here all day.
There is a reason so many people mention that, because it works. I am a huge advocate of this. I kicked off something in a couple of companies that I've worked for called the Walk With Me experiment. And what it is there are many meetings that don't require you to be on camera or sharing a screen, and just pick one of those, meet up with someone random in your team or even outside your team, and just go for a talk, go for a walk and a talk, get yourself away from your desk. Do that out in nature, have a conversation, allows you to connect with people, because it's kind of simulating some of those water cooler chats you might have had in the office. The other thing I like to do is I use my Alexa. She's going to ping at me now. I use my Alexa to set me Pomodoros, and then 25 minutes of focus, 5 minutes to just get up, stretch, walk around, away from the desk. Move your eyes away from that screen, give yourself a bit of a mental break. And the other thing I love doing is encouraging people to change their Outlook settings if they're using Outlook. There's a very quick, simple tip you can use where you alter your default meeting time to be 25 minutes and 50 minutes rather than a half hour and an hour. And by encouraging people to do that, when they set up a meeting, by default, it always allows gaps between meetings so that people get a comfort break, a stretch, whatever that may be, so they don't feel chained to their desks constantly and constantly bouncing from meeting to meeting to meeting.
I love that. I'm a big fan of the quarter-hour increments for sure, because you're absolutely right. I mean, I felt that even at the office when I was in person, but if you're just sitting here literally in the same chair for hours, meeting after meeting back to back,
And there's research behind it too. I saw Microsoft release an article recently showing brain scans of how people look after a certain number of meetings and other back-to-back meetings, and over time they become more and more stressed. So we need to try and do something, and there won't be a one-size-fits-all solution for every company, every person, but there's lots of different things that we can all try. And as someone in a leadership position in my company, I'm always trying to enable and empower people to have those breaks, to manage their time and not feel like it's a big block of one day and they're stuck to a desk. Final question then, and it's probably my favorite one. So I always ask every guest on my show to add a new retrospective theme to my backlog. I've recently released a Dungeons and Dragons retro and an Australian animals retro. I'm currently producing a Pride retro and one based on Jumanji the Jumanji the game. So what would you add to my backlog, Jess?
How do you follow Pride and Jumanji and Australian animals?
Well, Pride and Jumanji haven't been released yet, so they're not currently in a followable state, but I'm sure you've got something.
I'm talking about even from an ideation perspective, those are all really good. Well, I mean, selfishly, I'd have to suggest something related to cycling, namely mountain biking, just because it's my number one hobby. That or anything music related is what I do personally. But I could see where mountain biking, I could just picture the retrospective. So I'm gonna lock in that response.
Mountain biking, the retrospective. Yeah. I'll get my ideas thinking hat on, and I'm thinking some sort of mud guards to protect people. I'm thinking, what's your helmet for safety? I don't know. I'll go somewhere with this, and I'll create something. Thank you for adding that to the backlog. Thank you for being a guest on the show in season 2 of the Virtually Agile videocast. It's been wonderful to have you. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, your insights. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Always a pleasure talking to you, and it was a delight to be on today. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Cheers.